Translation. Anyone whose work is not meant to elevate him to religious life, anyone whose religious ritualistic performances do not raise him to renunciation, and anyone situated in renunciation that does not lead him to devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead must be considered dead, although he is breathing. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Devahuti's statement is that since she was attached to living with her husband for sense gratification, which does not lead to liberation from material entanglement, her life was simply a waste of time. Any work one performs that does not lead to the state of religious life is useless activity. Everyone is by nature inclined to some sort of work, and when that work leads one to religious life, and religious life leads one to renunciation, and renunciation leads one to devotional service, one attains the perfection of work. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, any work that does not lead ultimately to the standard of devotional service is a cause of bondage in the material world. Yagya tat kamano nyatra lokayam karma bandhana. Unless one is gradually elevated to the position of devotional service, beginning from his natural activity, he is to be considered a dead body. Work which does not lead one to the understanding of Krishna consciousness is considered useless. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Amlitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, very interesting story, because the whole chapter has been describing. One second. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Amlitamya Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunivadi Paschacha Deshadarne Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Sorry. So interesting, because the whole chapter has been describing how Devahuti has, as women do, not just they want children. Actually, we were hearing yesterday how one of our Goshala devotees also wants children, and he's planning how to fulfill that aspiration. So Devahuti, she has the most qualified husband in the universe, and he's a saint. He's a very saintly person. His whole life is absorbed in deep Krishna consciousness, God consciousness. So she has to approach him with all her sincerity. And she's such a chaste wife that extraordinarily she had sacrificed all her womanly needs for the service of her husband. And she was disheveled. She was wearing simple clothing. And so he being a great mystic yogi, arranged for her to become exceedingly beautiful again, to reveal all her beauty. So by his mystic powers, he created all these maid servants, and they took care of her and bathed her. And then for a long time, they traveled from all the places of the universe, just enjoying life with the purpose of, just enjoying for a long, long time. The Bhagavad Gita tells us that the great sages, they don't take pleasure in the senses because they're temporary. Yehi sam spashaja boga dukkha yonia evate adyanta vanta kontia nateshu ramate buddha. That it's not going to last long. It's going to finish. Whatever you enjoy with your senses, it's going to come to an end. You hope it never comes to an end, but it's going to come to an end. So even while you're enjoying something, you're thinking, oh my God, it's going to come to an end. I hope it never comes to an end. So even in this case, they were enjoying for a long, 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 long time, but still it comes to an end. And at the end, then he expanded himself into 9 forms. This is where they say women are 9 times lusty because their strength is 9 times more. So he expanded himself into 9 expansions, and they had 9 daughters. But she wasn't fulfilled. She wanted a son. Actually, my wife's she's from Durban, South Africa, and her mother is Telugu and her father is Tamil. So she had, the first child was a boy, and then they want another boy. So 7 daughters later, they still wanted another boy. So finally, they had another boy. So sometimes a family, they don't feel complete unless they have a boy. So somehow, in this case, Devahuti wanted a boy. So there's a lull here now. She's now becoming introspective. And it's like that sometimes. When you're absorbed in sense gratification, when you're really enjoying yourself, you kind of put Krishna to the side a little bit, or he's kind of in the background. Thank you, Krishna, for this opportunity to enjoy myself. You're very kind to fulfill my desires. But the deep absorption about going back home, back to Godhead, is being kind of put to one side for a little while. But then when you've expanded your absorption in enjoyment, then you become a little reflective. Okay, then you become absorbed in Krishna in more detail. So this is kind of a lull here. Kapila, their son, great son, has not been manifested yet. But she wants to have a son because her husband's about to go. And how devastating that must be. Someone she's given her life to for so long is about to leave. Just go. Anyway, so this is where this verse is coming in, this perception. So she's commenting here that what is the point in work if it doesn't lead to Dharma? And as we go about our business, of course here you're all involved with the highest absorption in Krishna consciousness. But when you leave the entrance gate, right there on the exit, you find people who are absorbed in work. And that's what they're just absorbed in work. That's what they're thinking about. Of course, you're from India, so oftentimes people who go involved with work, they're also pious as well to some degree. But they may not be fully thinking about Dharma, about something more substantial, about purifying their existence. They may not be thinking about that. They're just thinking... We a couple of days ago, we got on a bus. It was an 8-hour bus journey, one of these sleeper buses. And I didn't think that the driver or his assistants were thinking about Dharma. I think they were just thinking about doing a job, getting over and done with. So most people are like that. They're living their life, they're doing something, but they're not thinking about a higher purpose of Dharma. So you're meant to work with the purpose of doing it with something spiritual as the goal, Dharma. I mean, that's not the conclusion either, because you could be very attached to doing your Dharma. I'm doing my Dharma, and you can be very attached that you're doing your Dharma. So beyond Dharma is this sense that you have to be detached from it. So there's work, there's Dharma, then there's renunciation. So even renunciation is not sufficient. You may feel, okay, I'm detached from the world now. I'm doing my work. I'm doing things properly, according to spiritual injunctions, and I'm feeling detached. I'm not getting absorbed in it, but that's still not enough. And this verse is saying that you have to be tirthapad. You have to be absorbed in Krishna, in the Lord's lotus feet. They themselves are places of pilgrimage. Like here you have the forms of the Lord on the altar, and this is a place of pilgrimage because the Lord's lotus feet are here. This is where he's standing. So this verse, Devahuti is saying that unless you come to that position, then you're doing your life, but actually you're dead. Or as good as dead. The soul by nature is his nature is to be ecstatically involved in serving Krishna and being with Krishna and having activity with Krishna. But when you're absorbed in the material world, you're actually dead. You're not spiritually alive. You're therefore the mritya is described there. So she's lamenting that, she's kind of contemplating that what is the use in just living your life if you're not absorbing Krishna? And we're trying to come to that point, realization in our own lives, to become convinced that unless I'm fixed in the lotus feet of Krishna, it's not worth doing anything else. This is what we're trying to aspire for in devotional service. I'm going to make a slight detour now in the class, hope you don't mind. One of my interests is discovering the Bhagavatam's revelations about the field of cows, because this is what my service has been focused on for the last, 30 odd years. As Prabhu was mentioning, I became the Goshala manager of the Bhaktivedanta Manor in 1992. And I wanted to know, actually, what are we meant to do? How are we meant to do it? And is there any information in our Shastra that gives us clues what we should do? And lo and behold, the Srimad Bhagavatam gives so many practical revelations about how you do cow protection. Many things are described there. So I started compiling all the verses. And in the Bhagavatam, there's about 600 verses that have some connection with cows or milk or bulls or something like that. In this third chapter, there's 28 verses, and most of them you've already looked at. And so what I've been doing is compiling those verses and then giving a modern-day cow protection perspective. And I'm writing a book. I've got halfway, 3/4 of the book now. Damodar Lal's got 2 of those books if you can coax a look at them if you're interested. So what I would like to do is just refer to a couple of verses in this chapter that have something to say about cows, and then in the next 20 minutes just explore some of those things. I think a very important one for us here, particularly because you are doing it very practically, is the use of bullocks. A bull is sometimes Srila Prabhupada used the word bull. It means anything that's male, basically. When we say bullocks in England, we refer to a castrated bull. In America, they often term them oxen. You're working with oxen. I know when I've used the word bullocks in my tours recently, that people don't necessarily equate bullocks with a castrated bull. It could be a bull in any case. Interesting, bull-ox, ox, that word is kind of there, and I think linguistically that's where it came from. And there's a Sanskrit word called uksha. I think that's where the word ox came from, uksha. There's no Sanskrit word that definitively describes castrating a bull. I thought I'd just mention that. There's nothing that says this word means castrating a bull. Unfortunately, it'd be very helpful if there was such a word, but there isn't. And particularly, there's nothing in the Srimad Bhagavatam that talks about it either. But there are many verses that talk about this concept of controlling an ox, controlling a bull through the nose. And there's one verse that you discovered earlier in this chapter, 3:3-4. Bull's nose, I think there's 2 actually in his reference. I think there's 2 here. One is, let me see here. Oh yeah, there's 2. One is 3:3-4, where bulls' noses were not pierced. This is talking about Krishna's pastime, how there was this challenge that who was it now? Subhadra? Who was it? Which wife was it who had that test set by her father? That whoever could control these 7 bulls. So, who was it? Anyway, one of the wives of Krishna. Sorry. Please excuse me for not remembering her name. So her father set this test. Now these bulls were noted for being, if they could smell a prince, they wanted to kill them. So you've got these bulls here, bullocks, oxen. Imagine they were bulls. They smelt anyone with a bit of testosterone, they wanted to kill them. And if you wanted to marry this girl, you had to subdue 7, not just 1, 7 of them. And their noses were not pierced. This is what's point here. Because if a bull's nose is pierced, you can control it. You can put a rope on it. You can control it. It's not such a big deal. It is a big deal, But even modern farmers with bulls, they control it within a ring or something. So the test was no rings, no ropes, no piercing, and there were 7 of them. And they could smell a prince and want to kill them. So Krishna, he somehow subdued these 7 bulls. Interestingly, it's kind of interesting because Prabhupada talks about you control a bull by its nose in the Krishna book. But in the Sanskrit words, and you don't get the sense that those bulls were controlled by the nose, because the depiction is just as a child controls a pet goat. Interesting comment. So the picture I have in my mind is that you put a rope around a little goat's neck, that's how people, and then you pull it along. So the image I'm seeing is that Krishna has somehow they put a rope around these bulls and he was pulling them. That's the power of his power. He wasn't relying on the easy method or the easier method of grabbing them by the nose. He was just basically physically pulling them along, and they came along like little goats being pulled by a child, a toy goat. That's how easy it was. So that's one verse that talks about that. And the other one is very clearly in this is the third canto, 15th chapter, text 8. As a bull is directed by a rope to its nose, very clearly defining there. You may have seen some of the videos how they pierce noses. You may even have witnessed it here. They basically put a needle through the nose and pull a rope through it. And that's how you do it. One time, I was going to train these oxen in Leicester. There's a devotee called Sitaram, and he has a project called the Ahimsa Dairy Foundation. So he had these Holsteins, and they were like absolutely huge. I had to look up like this at the shoulder. They're absolutely huge. And they weren't trained. Somehow they never trained them, and I was given the task of training them. And I thought, how on earth are you going to train them? With other ones, I've just basically put a yoke on them, put a ring through the nose. No, the ring's already there. Put a rope on behind them, and more or less off you go. And you put them in you walk around a compound, and you walk outside. But these were so huge, they could leap a fence without any difficulty. Anyway, I put a rope to its nose. It was one of those moments. I'm sure none of you have ever seen any movies. I'm sure you've never heard of the movie Avatar. But they have this hair strand, and they can plug it into living things like an animal. And then suddenly they plug into this kind of, flying lizard or some kind of horse. They put it in, and the horse's eyes go like this. And there's a kind of a connection there between the driver and the animal. So the same thing happens with an ox driver and his bullocks. You put a rope, you put a nose, you grab hold of that reins, and the bull goes like this. And you're controlled. And at first they get alarmed, what's happened? But gradually, as they surrender to it, they become peaceful. And you see that transformation going from, them being excitable and agitated to becoming subdued. So the Bhagavatam is giving a number of examples like that just like you control a bull by its nose, then we can also, by accepting the control of the Lord and by submitting ourselves to the Supreme, then you become peaceful. So this is a very important verse in the field of chiropractic, and particularly these days. There are very strong organizations that are not our friends. Vegans are often not our friends. Those who propose vegan, and they don't like the fact that we pierce noses, castrate bulls, that we work them, that we drink milk, that we separate calves from the mothers. This is why the word ahimsa, it's not such a good word as a measuring tool. If people measure us with the word ahimsa, it's very hard to justify, because ahimsa means no violence, but people see what we're doing as violence. Do you mean you separate the calf from the mother? Isn't that ahimsa? You mean you pierce the nose of your bulls and you control them? Is that not himsa? Is that not violence? You castrate the bulls. Is that not a great himsa, a great harm? Interestingly, one time I was in Sweden, and there was some vegan organization, and they wanted to save these bulls. So we said, okay, we'll take them. We want some bulls. And they say, what will you do with them? I said, well, we'll take them, we'll neuter them, we'll pierce their noses, and we'll work them in the forest, pulling out logs. I just, I don't think you can do that. That doesn't suit our ethics. Anyway, so they didn't give them to us. And I said, we're going to love these bulls for their whole life. But they couldn't cope with it. But then later on we heard that these bulls were almost going to be slaughtered. So the place they could get a place for them said they have to get neutered. So they had no choice but to neuter the bulls to go to another place. Now, you may be aware that and especially I've seen it in my southern Indian tour, this concept of bulls not being neutered. I went to one Goshala, and he said, we had heard that it is sinful to neuter a bull, to castrate a bull. So the idea was going around that it's sinful. I don't do anything sinful. And it's not a himsa, because you have to obviously do some intervention. This verse is kind of related to it, or this verse is around you, because it's talking about an intervention. You're putting a needle through the nose of a bull. So intervention is part of the Vedic system. You hear in the Bhagavatam very, very clearly there's like different phases of a calf's life. If you look at the Bhagavatam verses, you find that there was very young calves, especially in the Govardhan, Lord Brahma stealing the calves. There's very important information there, because there was younger calves somewhere else. They weren't out there grazing. They were in the village. Then there was calves, and because these cows that had seen the calves at the bottom of the hill, they had gone through this, you could say, acute distress. Imagine that your calf is Krishna, and not only are you loving the calf as a calf, but the calf is Krishna. Your attachment to that calf is so intense. But one day comes, and that calf had to be weaned away from its mother, because a new calf was coming. These cows were pregnant. So there's going to be a great trauma there. So that weaning is part of the system of cow protection. And what happens when the calf gets weaned? There's a certain period of time you hear it. Acute distress. And what do you do? we were in, again, I heard a story a few days ago. We'd weaned this calf from drinking milk. And a new volunteer was there. And he started giving milk again to the calf. So the coach, I said, why are you doing that? He said, it was in my heart. I felt I had to do it. There's pain connected to cow protection. You have to hear the crying of the mother to the calf for a little while. And then she kind of gives it up, and the calf gives it up, and they go on. They settle into it. So you can't measure what we do from the point of view of ahimsa. It's not a good measuring tool for us, but we use it. We call it ahimsa milk. But we have a different standard. We accept a certain amount of discomfort for a higher purpose. So we were actually discussing yesterday about this principle of neutering bulls. I thought I should mention it again. Where's the evidence for it? Why do we do it? Well, there's no direct reference in the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's no verse that clearly points out you neuter a bull. As this verse, these two verses here give indications about piercing a bull. Unfortunately, there's no verse as clear as that. But in our ISKCON Sampradaya, it's quite clear that's how we do it. In the previous generations, probably of your families, they all understood that you neuter bulls. You don't work a fully entire bull. In Srila Prabhupada's time, well, actually, it was understood. There's one story, I was visiting New Vrindavan, and a devotee called Yudhishthir, he recounts this story, that Srila Prabhupada was visiting New Vrindavan, and Yudhishthir was going along with his bulls. Now, in America at that time, they were very much influenced by the American Teamster method, where they don't use pierced noses. They're kind of against pierced noses, and they train their bulls by voice. They walk next to the front of them, they got a yoke on, and they give them guidance, and he swish a little stick around this. Anyway, so Yudhishthira Prabhu, he's walking along with his bulls like that, 2 big oxen, and he said that they're walking along. Srila Prabhupada further up, and he's got a little cluster of devotees, and Srila Prabhupada sees the oxen see Srila Prabhupada, and they start heading towards Srila Prabhupada. Now imagine, you've got your 2 bulls out there, you've got no nose ring, no rope, you just got them by a little bit of rope, and they're off. What are you going to do? So that was the case. These bulls are heading towards Srila Prabhupada, and you just think, oh my God, these oxen are going to kill Srila Prabhupada. That was with his mind, in his mind. Somehow or other, he pulled them to one side, and they kind of, imagine you jam into a pole like this, or one ox, they stop like that by using a tree as a brake. So Srila Prabhupada comes up to the bulls, and he pats them on the head or something. He says, don't you know that you control the bull by its nose? So the next day, Yudhishthira, who'd been trained in voice commands, he pierced the nose and put rings in. So Srila Prabhupada was aware of that system, and they were bullocks. They were not bulls, they were bullocks, they were oxen. So Srila Prabhupada was fully aware of that process. But you don't find Srila Prabhupada often using the word oxen, and maybe there's a reference to it, maybe in the Krishna book, but generally he just used the word bulls. But he talks about ploughing with bulls and transportation with bulls, but he's talking about bullocks, he's not talking about uncastrated bulls. So the strongest evidence for neutering them is that it is what people do. I mean, here we go, these devotees are making these flowers, garlands. And garlands you find described in the Bhagavatam, beautiful garlands, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. So similarly, you don't get the details of how to castrate a bull in the Bhagavatam. But it's just one of the things that you know how to do it. And the example I gave is like in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about Krishi Goraksha Vaniyam, cultivation of land, cow protection and trade are the activities of a Vaishya. But the details are not described there. How do you trade? What kind of, where do you get the details for that? That's described elsewhere. But those who engaged in it, they understand how to apply it. So those who work with bulls, they understand you got to castrate them. And those who generally are proselytizing about not castrating them are not working them either. It's an idea they have that they're not even practicing themselves. Generally you find where people advocate that, they actually bulls are just sitting in the field not working, because it's just very dangerous. And I mentioned yesterday, in Europe almost 3 people got killed by bulls over the last 2 years. And 2 of them were by mini zebus, not even the big, we've got a bull, 2 bulls at Bhagavatam Manor, and there's no way you'd even think about training them for a bullock cart. They're rippling with muscles. They're just full of lust. Their tongues hang down like this, they're slavering, and they're sniffing the air all the time for mating. But the oxen, okay, they notice the females, but they're not driven by the same fire. Anyway, so one devotee, he's like your Pavan Putra, an expert oxman. He's an expert oxman, and he thought, okay, I'm going to have these little mini zebus in my garden, and he looked after these guys, milking the cows, and then one day, maybe one of the cows was on heat or something, and the bull attacked him and almost killed him. So it's like he's like almost losing your main man here. So he was almost lost by the actions. So bulls are completely unpredictable. No pre-warning, just went for him. Similar thing happened. Someone came to do some hoof trimming. I'd warned this devotee. I said, you make sure you castrate that bull. No, we don't want to do it. The person who donated didn't want to do it. Anyway, this bull almost killed the hoof trimmer. Later on, they castrated him. Another devotee, a Himsa Foundation, he was moving a bull from one field to another. It just turned on him. Just literally turned on him. One time he was able to dodge under a fence. The next time, it actually smashed the gate and tried to pulverize him into the ground. Again, he broke a lot of bones. So bulls are serious. So people are advocating, no, you don't castrate your word. Okay, you show me. You show me. Here's a couple of bulls here. You train them and show me how you do it. No, they won't do it. It's a theoretical exercise. Some people do it. Some people train bulls to kind of, stand on their back hooves. You can do things like that, but the average mortal has to have neutered bulls. Okay, there's 4 minutes left. Any questions or comments? Many more things I could say.
It's culturally there, looting the bulls.
Sorry?
It's there culturally, like in the sense.
Yeah, that's the evidence. It's like even Krishna says to his father, "Why are you doing this Indra Puja? Is it tradition?" So that has some value in it. We do what your parents do has a value. So that's how everyone did it. They neutered their bulls and they worked them. That's the evidence. The evidence is real life, not just some idea that someone invented. That's the real evidence for it. That's kind of it's not shastric. We're kind of we're clarifying our shastra. We have our own ISKCON Sampradaya that makes these things, how we do things. And we should hold on to it. We should resist the veganists, because they're not pacified. They won't be pacified until you have cows in a forest that are away from people. Actually, I was talking to, Gauravani, the famous singer, one of the famous singers. Somehow that happened to be in a room with him one time, and he was talking about how he knew the people of the top of the vegan lobbyists, and their agenda is depopulation. It's about depopulation. The idea is that the animals shouldn't be, people shouldn't have animals. They should be in a forest somewhere. Oh, and by the way, there's too many people on Earth. Therefore, we should depopulate, and the animals should be running around live. Now, the average vegan person isn't aware of that agenda, but at the top, that's the kind of it's anti-Vedic. We should have cows. You may hear this argument. I've got 2 minutes left. I'll jump it in. There's too many cows. We cannot advocate that. Do your maths. Work out how many cows there should be if it's all cow protection and we're providing milk for the whole population. Work out, we've got to give everyone at least 1 cup of milk. Prabhupada says half a pound of milk or 1 pound of milk. So make a calculation. How many cows do you need to give everybody 1 pound of milk a day? And you'll find actually we need a few more cows than there currently are on the planet. So we do not support the idea there are too many cows. No, there's not enough cows. Our point is there should be protected cows. We have 1 minute left. Any final comments or questions? Okay, anyway, there's 28 verses in this 3rd chapter, and you can unpack them and explore them in similar ways. They have a lot of practical messages. So we'll end here. Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Hare Krishna.
Shyamsundar Prabhu ki.